what is if we just do a high level dive into the three themes or the three
Sure.
topics, money, time, and balance,
Right.
maybe you could just introduce each one to a little
Sure.
bit deeper extent, if you
Oh,
don't
yeah,
mind.
sure. All right. With regard to money, the way I'm taking it now, if your name is John Paul Getty the second or whatever, you don't have to worry about money or, Bill Gates's son or daughter or whatever. So I'm talking about just normal, ordinary people. I'm not talking about people who are going to inherit great wealth or, who get
Yeah.
hit it big on the super lotto or whatever it is. So I'm talking about normal people. In the case of normal people, when it comes to money, a key thing about money is what are you spending your time on? What is the focus of your life? And is it on your unique abilities?
Hmm.
If it is, then there's good reason to believe you'll do well with regard to money. And I can get into that in a little more detail. On the issue of time, again, time is a focus question, but this time it's a question of priority setting. What priorities do you have in your life and how are you
Hmm.
setting them? And there's this, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the 80-20 rule as a rule for helping you decide what to do, when, and how. So I can talk a bit about that. And in the area of balance, what I talk about is values, whatever values you have,
Hmm.
and how you live your values. Are you equally living all your values, or are you cutting some values short? And there's a wheel that I use as an example of how are you a flat tire or are you a circular wheel? And that's the way I address that topic.
So I know the book has a lot of stories. As you were writing and doing research, I guess, let's dissect it now into each one. Stories around money. Did you come across stories of people who were able to do what you're suggesting and do it successfully?
Yes, I'm going to share one story. I'm not sure if I've got it in the book or not, but it's a story that comes to mind when you ask this question. And that's,
Hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Og Mandino. Do you know who that is? No.
I don't.
He wrote a book called The Greatest Salesman in the World, and it was a huge hit. And
Yes.
his life story's a really curious one. When he was growing up, his mother cultivated this idea that, Og, you should be a writer. You're going to be a great writer. But no, he wasn't really that interested in that. He got through high school. He wanted to get out into the world and, make a name for himself. And World War II broke out. And
Hmm.
he ended up going to Europe, and he was a bomber on an airplane with Jimmy Stewart, the actor, who was the same
Yeah.
trooper squadron that he was in. And so he was somehow survived World War II and came back at the end of the war. But coming back to the United States in his life, there wasn't exactly a great need for a former bomber in World War II in terms of work. He couldn't
Right.
find work. And his life sort of crashed, like he worked here and there, not doing very well, got married, had a kid, couldn't
Hmm.
support the family, became an alcoholic actually. And he hit rock bottom basically one day. He's walking down the street, and as he tells the story, and it's worthwhile to look up the story just
Hmm.
to hear it firsthand instead of through me. But the story goes that he's walking down the street and it's cold, and he looks into a window, a store window, and there was a gun for sale there, a pistol, and I think it was $10. And he reached into his pocket, and just at that time, he had $10 left. And he thought to himself, why don't I just go and buy that gun and, put an end to
And
this misery.
mm,
Something made him pass by and forget that. And he went to the library and he started reading. And he read a book by W. Clement Stone uh, about success. And I can't give you the exact name of the book off the top of my head, but I think it was like a positive attitude type
mhm,
book.
mhm.
And it turned his life around. And he started looking at, what he could do. And he was reminded of his mother's, words about writing and stuff like that. But he went to Clement Stone and asked if he could, join the insurance company that Clement Stone had. And Stone gave him a job and he became, fairly good at insurance.
Mm,
Then Stone said to him, let's do a newsletter. You can write a newsletter for us. And he started writing a newsletter and it turned into writing for Success Magazine. He became the editor
wow.
of Success Magazine. Yeah. And then he went on to write these books, so focusing on some strength that you have. There's an
Mm.
example of someone who was able to do that.
Yeah, it's a great example, great story.
Yeah.
What about the time you mentioned the 80-20 rule? I'm sure most listeners are familiar with it.
Yeah.
Probably tried to practice it. I'm not sure we've all been successful in that endeavor, but the concept is probably well known.
Yeah. 80-20 rule. So it comes from Pareto, who was an economist in Italy, who analyzed the economy in Italy and came to the realization that 20% of the population owned 80% of the wealth.
Mm,
And then if you look at that, generally that rule seems to apply to a lot of things. So for example, 20% of the people in an organization are leaders, for example, and the 80% are followers, or 20% of an organization make 80% of the money of an organization,
mhm,
as an example. But the real big breakthrough for me in this area came from Jim Rohn, which we've talked about, in the way he translated that rule into a workable rule for me in my life. And that translation was, the way he put it is, when you're looking at something you want to get done, you're going to find that 80% of what you're trying to do can be resolved by focusing on 4 or 5 things, maybe 6 things that are key, and the
mm,
rest is not so significant. So focus on 4 or 5, maybe 6 things, and pay 80% of your time on that, and 20% of your time on other stuff. And to illustrate this more concretely, suppose, for example, we were talking earlier, I think before we came on the air, about my background. I'm Ukrainian in background.
mm,
Suppose you're President Zelensky and you're faced with a war with Putin in your country,
mhm,
and you're the president. Suppose you had to run the country. How would you run it using this formula? Well, what you would do is I would suppose, if I was him, you list all the things that need to be done: health, education, war, missiles, whatever it is, a whole list of things. And then you ask yourself, okay, we don't have resources to do all of this, but
mm,
what resources, 4 or 5 things, can we spend 80% of our time on to get the 80% benefit that we're trying to get?
mm,
And spend 80% on that and 20% on everything else. But, and so it might be, for example, ammunition, food,
yeah,
economy, whatever it is, and work with that kind of a formula. And you can get into this, you could pick each item. So for example, in the area of economy, what are the 4 or 5 things that are the most important things to do for the economy? And let's work on those 4 or 5 things and spend
mm,
80% of our time on those 4 or 5 things and 20% on the rest. And
yeah.
then, you can go on like this forever. It will drive you crazy. But anyway, that's the way, that's time, doing the best with the time that you have available.
And we see examples of that all throughout business, throughout our lives. I mean, you've explained it very succinctly, but as a leader, we try and identify the things that are going to have the greatest impact, and we narrow that down and focus on those things. And what you're suggesting, I guess, is for young people. This is also a great piece of advice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.